For the past few weeks, I have been preaching on a theme that we've been just calling very simply, God is able. And I realized that as we come to the conclusion of that series, that this is really one of the key foundation blocks of our faith. An acknowledgement that no matter what we face, God is able. In fact, more than able. We've been singing at the end of a lot of our services a little chorus that says, He is able, more than able, to accomplish what concerns me today. He is able, more than able, to handle anything that comes my way. He is able, more than able, to do just what He wants to do in me. He can make me what He wants me to be. He can accomplish anything in my life that needs to be accomplished. He is able to do it. And acknowledging that with our minds, but more than that, living our lives believing that, is one of the, as the expression goes, one of the linchpins, one of the key pins that holds our faith together. Because if I don't believe that God is able, then I can't trust God. If I don't believe that God can handle the situations that I face, then I really cannot afford to put my life in His hands, because He might fail. He might let go. He might not care. But the fact that God is able, that God is trustworthy and faithful and is able to handle anything that I have to deal with, allows me to live my life in faith. It allows me to do more than just believe. It allows me to make certain decisions. Now, what this is based on is I'm acknowledging with my life, when I live by my faith, when I make decisions based on what I believe to be true, and I actually carry out my faith, put it into practice, I become a doer of the Word, as James calls it, and as Jesus calls it. That whenever I begin to do that, trusting that God is more than able, then I have put my faith in an unseen God whose voice I cannot necessarily hear audibly the way I hear someone else's voice, trusting that that God can reveal His truth to me, trusting that that God can lead my life, trusting that that God can handle the situations. I'm putting my faith in something I cannot see, something I cannot hear, something I cannot touch, and yet I'm saying it is more real than those things that I can. That He is more real than the things I see, more real than the things I can touch, more real than the things I can hear with the audible voice. That God's reality is greater, and that God, this unseen God, not only can move physically, but does move physically. He brings healing, He brings deliverance, He changes circumstances, He works in people's lives, He works on behalf of people's lives, and He does all these things in what we call the real physical world. And He does it by a power that I cannot understand. When I am able to do that, when I am able to live that way, then I am putting Hebrews 11:1 into practice. Paul writes about faith, and he says, faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see. Now, I like that translation because it really puts it down to where we live. Faith isn't just thinking it might be true. Faith is not just a matter of saying, well, maybe, or probably, or I believe that it's true. Faith is saying, I know that it's true, and I know it so much that I'm willing to put my life on the line on behalf of it. I'm willing to act because I know it is true. He says right here, faith is being sure of what we hope for. It is being certain of what we have not seen. A lot of people think of faith as, well, with fingers crossed, I sure hope so. No. Faith is saying, I know it's true because I know the one in whom I believe. I am certain that He is able. I know the one I trust. And I know He is faithful. I don't have to guess. I don't have to think it. I don't have to just believe it. I know it's true. And I can live my life based on knowing that it's real. Most of us go through our lives hoping that it's real. True faith is when you come to that place that you know that it's real and you're willing to risk because it is real. Knowing that God is able. Knowing that God not only is able, but God is willing. Knowing that not only is God willing, but God is doing, sets us free to live our lives the way that God has intended us to live. Do you think Adam and Eve had any question in their minds about God? About His reality? About His presence or His power? No, no question in their mind. They walked and talked with God. He was just as real to them as the world that He had created. There was no doubt in their minds, no question. They knew it to be true. You can see the difference in Scripture between those who hope that it's true and those who know that it's true. Those who hope that it's true, they'll go in and they'll offer sacrifices, or they'll go in and they'll pray a little bit, but their lives are always lived tentatively. But those who know that it's true put everything on the line. Those who know that it's true are willing to do whatever God says to do. Those who know that it's true are willing to be obedient in whatever it is that God calls them. They're not paralyzed by insecurity, fear, or doubt. Not that they don't sometimes have them, but they're not paralyzed by it. They're not stopped by those things. Because you see, every once in a while, little doubts start creeping in, and little questions like, John, are you making the right decisions? And are you sure you're moving on the right course? And those things will come, and you battle with those kinds of things. We all do. And then all of a sudden, one morning, I stopped and I said, wait a minute. I'm talking about the King of the universe here. A God who simply speaks and everything is. A God who knows the end from the beginning. A God in whom there is no deceit. There is no unfaithfulness. I can't lose. How can I lose trusting my life in the hands of that kind of God? I mean, as a man told me once when he was facing surgery, I mentioned this, it's been some time to you, but he was getting ready to face cancer surgery, and he was an elderly man who had a heart problem. And I went into his room just moments before they were to take him down for the surgery, and he was smiling, just big grin on his face. And I said, Jim, what's going on? And he said, well, you know, it's really funny. Last night I started getting a little bit anxious. And he said, suddenly I thought, wait a minute. I'm in God's hands. If I die in this surgery, I'm going to be with the Lord. And if I live, I'm in His hands. I can't lose. No matter what I'm facing, I'm in God's hands, and He is more than able. Now, you see how that sets you free? It sets you free to do whatever needs to be done. It sets you free to live your life the way God wants you to. It sets you free because He is the Creator. He is the Sovereign. And what can God do? Anything He wants to. And nobody can stop Him. You know, that's one of the beauties of the name that He gave to Moses. When Moses says, well, who are you that I would take your name back so that the people will know who it is that has sent me? And He gave him a name, and it means I was who I was, I am who I am, I will be who I will be, and it can also be translated, and I will do what I will do. In other words, I don't need to be defined by anybody, and nobody tells me what to do. That's the God. So what can God do? He can do anything, and He can do everything. And it's a realization that that God who moves in the spiritual, acts and manifests His power in the physical, sets us free to live our lives the way that we need to live them. The issue of faith is not what you think to be true. The real issue of faith is what you know to be true. And to say that God is able does a real interesting thing. It puts the focus on what God is doing and not what we are doing. We came to this series out of a little short series that I did called the Grasshopper Complex. In the Grasshopper Complex, and I began to realize the Grasshopper Complex is focusing upon me. Who am I that I should do this? What resources do I have? And look how big the opposition is. And it's looking at me, looking at me, looking at me. To say God is able changes the focus from me to Him. It says, when you see your inability, look to God who has the ability. When you feel that you can't, look to God who can. It's an issue of trust. It's an issue of dependence. It's an issue of surrender. It's true. We can't. But God can. We only fail when we stop with we can't. When we say, we can't do the good that God would have us do. That's true. But God can do it through us. Unless the Lord builds the house, they labor in vain who build it. We are dependent upon God. And so the focus of our lives, when situations come against us, when things happen in our life, should not be, what am I going to do? It is, God, what are we going to do? Because God is the one who is able. The focus of our lives begins to shift. It takes our eyes off of our own inability, and it puts our eyes on His ability. Moses said, God, I can't do this. I can't speak. God says, Moses, I'll be with your mouth. God, I can't lead these people. I don't have any power to lead them. Moses, I will demonstrate my power through your rod. God, I won't know what to say. Moses, I'll put the ideas in your mind. I'll tell you what to say. And when you stumble, I'll give you someone else to express the words for you if necessary. But I will do it through you. Quit talking about your inability. That's one thing about God. Every time we start saying, I can't, He says, it's not about you, it's about me. I can. Get your eyes off of yourself and focus them upon me. There's a real danger when we don't do that. If we begin focusing our eyes on ourselves, the first thing that happens is we start getting fearful. Especially if it's a big task. And we start saying, how are we going to deal with this? How am I going to do that? How in the world are we going to accomplish it? Where are the resources going to come from? What in the world are we going to do? But when we begin to focus on God, it shifts. You see, what happens is when we get fearful, we start grabbing for control. Because the only way I can overcome my fears is to be in control of the situation. So now I have not only stopped trusting that God can, now I have taken authority away from God, and now I'm exercising it for my own life. But when we focus on God, that changes. It's kind of like the poem you've seen, because we always put it in the newsletter about every 4th or 5th month, or at least a mention to it, let go and let God. That we have to let go of our fears and let God be in charge. That's the issue. And when we focus on God's ability and not our inability, that's what happens. That's what happens. Now, when that occurs, that frees us up because it frees us to take risks. If I can trust God and God is able, then I can take risks with my life. Because I can risk making a mistake. I can risk what is important. I can even risk my own life if necessary, if I can trust that God is able. Because you know what God will do? He will take my mistake and He'll teach me through it. Or He will take my mistake and He'll turn it around and make something good out of it anyway. Or He will take my mistake and before I hit disaster, He'll catch me up and reassure me that He's there. It doesn't matter how He's going to deal with it. I am free to try. Not having all the answers and not knowing that I have perfect vision, not seeing the whole blueprint for my life, I can still reach out and step out, make that step of faith, because I know that God is there to catch me if I fall. That's what it's about. It is the willingness to take the risk. But remember this, the risk must be an obedience action, not simply your own choice. It must be obedience. There's a lot of people say, and I've heard it said, well, He said, forsake all for the cross, so I'm just going to forsake everything and God's supposed to take care of me. If He doesn't say do it, you better not try. Because He gives you the ability to take care of yourself, and He calls you to responsibility. But if God says go, you go. If God says give up, you give up. If God says surrender, you surrender. If God says work harder, you work harder. Whatever it is that He tells you to do, that's what you do in obedience. But you see, you are free to walk in faith. When He says do it, you're free to take the chance. Because He is trustworthy and because He is able. Peter is in the boat with the other disciples. Jesus is walking along in the water, and the waves are tossing. There's a big storm, and Peter says, they're all afraid. They think it's a ghost. And he says, no, don't worry, it's me. And Peter says, well, Lord, if it's really you, tell me to come to you. You'll notice Peter never stepped 1 foot out of that boat until Jesus said, come. He didn't do it on his own. He didn't say, hey, Jesus, you wait there. I'm going to walk to you. There was no arrogance there. He said, Lord, if it is you, tell me to come. And Jesus said, come. And obediently, Peter stepped out of the boat and began to walk on the water, to take a risk with his life, because he was acting in obedience to the Lord, because he trusted him, because he knew, he was seeing that God is able. But trusting God in this way does one other thing, and that is, it gives us the strength to face the crises of our lives. Not many of us is called to walk out in faith and trust God for everything. Not many of us is called to even have to trust God for most things by walking in faith. But every single one of us is going to face crises in our lives. Every single one of us we're going to face some kind of adversity, some kind of trial, some kind of problem, some kind of difficulty that's going to become a challenge to our faith or to our faithfulness. And it's in those moments that we need to keep in our minds and in our hearts, my God is able. Because sometimes that's going to be the only thing you have to cling to. And that's going to be the only thing that's going to keep you afloat. Because sometimes those storms get really big. And sometimes they come very hard. And we get wounded emotionally. And we get frightened emotionally sometimes. And doubts begin to rise. And that's when we need to be proclaiming to ourselves and standing and living our lives on the declaration, my God is able. He's able to see me through. He's able to keep me from falling. He's able to lift me up. He's able to change my life or change my circumstances. James, in his letter, in chapter 1, verses 2, 3, and 4, writes about facing trials and tribulations in life. And what he writes could easily be a tremendous mystery to us, because he puts it this way. Consider it pure joy, my brothers, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith develops perseverance. Perseverance must finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. Well, I agree that perseverance brings us to maturity. And I also agree that tests often build perseverance. But consider it joy? I mean, that's a little hard. That's probably the last emotion in our minds when we face a trial or a major problem is, oh, I am so joyful that this has come. Well, he's not really saying jump up and clap your hands, hot diggity dog, I've got another trial to face. He's talking about joy, which comes out of your relationship with God. Joy is not an emotion like happiness that depends on circumstances. In fact, joy is not at all dependent upon circumstances. It's dependent upon the faithfulness of God and your knowledge of that. He is saying, when you are facing a trial, be joyful to know that God is going to work through that to accomplish something wonderful in your life. That when a crisis comes, then you should be saying, well, that means on the other side of this, there's going to be some blessing like I have never seen before. I'm either going to be growing more, or God's going to be revealing something, or something great's going to be happening in my life, because God is strengthening me through this. And boy, that's a totally different way than we normally face adversity in our lives. We usually whine and cry and say, God, how could you do this to me? You've abandoned me. You've left me alone. Where are you, God? Don't you hear me anymore? God, help. Instead of saying, Lord, strengthen me to do what must be done. Teach me what I need to know. Grow me up, or expose unworthiness in my life and unholiness in my life, and let's purify it and get rid of it. God, give me the answers that I'm going to need. Give me the guidance I'm going to need. Give me the courage I'm going to need to fight this battle, to face this adversity. We don't usually do that because these challenges are very uncomfortable. They're very threatening. They're not at all a fun time. And what they usually do is force us into a position that we're not accustomed to. They either force us to depend on God, and we're not used to doing that, or they force us to our knees, or sometimes on our faces before God. And we're not necessarily accustomed to that. We're accustomed to being able to solve problems out of our own abilities and out of our own understanding and our own knowledge, or turn to the experts around us who solve the problems for us. We're not used to having to turn to God, but a crisis forces us out of our normal pattern and starts forcing us to get down to the very basics, the very fundamentals of our faith, where we have to cry out to God and say, God, I need you. We need Him all the time, but sometimes it takes that trial to force us to that position. So we're not comfortable with that, and therefore we don't like these crises when they come. But James is telling us they are there. God uses them in order to accomplish something through it. God will use it to accomplish something through it. Now, the reason that we usually whine and cry when an adversity comes along is because, and listen to this carefully, we cannot see a comfortable way out. It's not that we can't see a way out. We cannot see a comfortable way out. And we would rather have a comfortable way out of the situation. Proof of that is the millions and millions of dollars that people spend on the lotteries, looking for a comfortable way out of their difficulties. They're looking for the easy way out. And because God does not offer us an easy way out, we struggle when we come to adversity. And yet that's the very time that we should stop and say, wait a minute. First of all, my God is able to handle this situation. Secondly, it would not be here either because of mistakes I have made and decisions I have made. And sometimes that's what adversity comes. It comes because I've made some stupid decisions and I'm simply reaping what I sowed. I have a friend who puts it like this. We go out there and we sow our wild oats and then we pray for a crop failure. Because that's what we do. We sow in sin, and then when the consequences come back at us, we start crying, God, this isn't fair. Well, sometimes it's simply the consequence of our own actions. And God is showing us that. He said, you stick your finger against the needle, you're going to get pricked. It's going to hurt. Sometimes, though, it is there intentionally to destroy us, but God turns it around, and instead of letting it destroy us, He uses it to grow us up. Remember the words of Joseph to his brothers? Over in Genesis 50:20, he said, what you intended for evil, God intended for good, to accomplish this thing so that lives might be saved. What the enemy intends for evil, God can use. What, you mean God can use a bad situation? He surely can. He can use a bad situation to grow us, to prepare us, to do all sorts of things in our lives. We don't like it because it's not comfortable, but God can use it to do something beautiful and wonderful in our lives. He is able to take any situation and bring glory to Himself through it. And we cannot ever forget that. We must remember that as we live our lives, that no matter what we're facing, God is able to glorify Himself through it if we are willing to let Him do so in our lives. God is able, more than able. Sometimes it's just a matter of changing our focus. To quit looking at the circumstances, quit looking at our inabilities, quit looking at the size of the problem, quit looking at the hopelessness that we feel, and start saying, God is able. With God there is an answer. With God there is a way out. I feel like I've already shared this with you recently, but if I have, I apologize, but I wanted to share with you a dream that Diane had just a short time ago. It's one of these strange dreams, and we don't always put a lot of meaning to dreams, but this one was so significant that we knew that this was, in a sense, a message from the Lord. In the dream, members of the news media had been taken prisoner by vampires. It sounds strange, but that's the way the dream went. They were being tortured with the intent and purpose of having their life sucked out of them. That was the purpose for their being held. They were being held in a dark, pitch-black room where you could not see anything. They tried comforting each other, but as they groped around the walls, there was no door, there were no windows. They were trapped, doomed, it seemed, with no way out. Now, as we understand the meaning of that, we are the announcers of God's good news. We are the news broadcasters. That the enemy wants to entrap us with crises in our lives and make us feel that it's hopeless, that there's no way out. We're blind and we cannot see. And we grope around trying to find a way out, and there is none. And we, to the best of our ability, we commiserate with each other, and we reassure each other, and we soothe each other, and we minister to each other, but we realize all of us are in the same boat. And the enemy would love to suck the life out of us, so there's nothing left and no hope left. But in the dream, morning began to dawn, and light began to stream in, because you see, as they looked up, they realized there was no ceiling, and the way out was up. All they had to do was help each other climb up, and they were free. The answer was there all along. They couldn't see it. It was by looking up and climbing up that they were to find the answer and to be free and to live. And there they gained the strength, because as one of their oppressors came, now they jumped him, and they were able to overcome the enemy, because they had been shown by God the way out. That's the way it is with our lives. We'll face a crisis in life. We'll face a problem. We'll face a difficulty. And we're groping around blindly. We cannot see the way out. But then God's light begins to shine. And when God's light begins to shine, we begin to see we're not prisoners at all. We're really free. There's nothing holding us. All we have to do is climb up. That means to get closer to Him. And as we do, we're strong enough to deal with anything that comes along. God is able to show us the answer. God is able to show us the path. God is able to provide for us on the path. God is able to do whatever He needs to do. The real issue of a crisis is not what's facing us. The real issue is how we face it. How do you look at the crisis? Do you go into despair, or do you begin to praise God in faith? Do you begin to say, Lord, what am I going to do? Or do you begin to say, Lord, sure I'm curious about what you're going to do? What is our approach? How do we face adversity? Do we see it as a challenge and an opportunity to grow, or do we see it as a threat? Something that's been unfairly imposed. God has let us down. God is letting us fall. I heard a man sharing, and he said, you have to understand that in Chinese, there are two characters. The Chinese characters. There are two characters for the word crisis. You put them together to form the word that we translate as crisis. The first character is dangerous. The second character is opportunity. That a crisis is a dangerous opportunity. And it all depends on which the one you look at the most. Whether you look at the dangerous side and get caught up in fear, or you look at the opportunity side and say, with God, all things are possible. And that's what a crisis is. It is a dangerous opportunity for us to grow in faith. It is a dangerous opportunity for us to mature. It is a dangerous opportunity for us to reach beyond where we are and to step out in faith or to walk in faith. It is a dangerous opportunity for us to turn to God and say, God, you are more than able. Let's together solve this problem. Together. Because you are more than able. It's a dangerous opportunity to reevaluate our lives and reevaluate the foundations on which our faith is built. It's a dangerous opportunity to trust ourselves in the hands of God. Never minimize the fact that it is a dangerous situation. Because to approach an adversity with a flippant attitude is a dangerous thing to do. But at the same time, every crisis presents an opportunity. An opportunity to learn, to grow, to mature, to trust, to see God work. Because God is more than able. Now, something is required of us. God's just not going to go out and do it for us necessarily. He requires something of us. And what He requires from us is surrender. A willingness to let Him be whatever He wants to be. No limitations placed on God. Freedom to His Spirit to move in us, through us, and around us any way that He wants to do so. Letting go of the controls and giving it over to Him. Because our natural tendency when we face a crisis is to run back to the last way we handled a crisis like that and try to do the same thing. But you see, a crisis presents us a dangerous opportunity to do something new, to venture out. Sometimes the crisis is not something that's happened, it's something that God puts us into or a demand that He puts upon our lives. That could be the crisis. For Abraham, the crisis was leaving his father's house and walking where he did not know. But it was a challenge to his faith and to his faithfulness to say, do I trust me and what I'm able to do, or do I trust this God who is leading me forth? Dangerous opportunity. And God will often do it a new way. You know, He had never parted the seas before the children of Israel got there. You know, He had never taken a wall down with shouts and sounds of trumpets until He had Joshua to do it. He had never done it that way before. It was all brand new. But that's what God says. The crisis is a chance for me to do something new in your life. But you have to trust it. Trust that I know what I'm doing. And trust that I am able to see you through it. After all, the issue always will be, how much do I trust God? How much do I trust Him? You remember what Job said? Though He slay me, yet I will hope in Him. Even if He takes my life, I'm still going to trust Him. Because I know He has a reason for it, if that's what's necessary. And I can trust His reasons. And I can trust His ways. Do we trust the ways of the Lord? Do we trust the ability of the Lord? Do we trust the ideas of the Lord? Do we trust the faithfulness of the Lord to handle what we face? To not only just bring us through surviving, but to bring us through victoriously. Do we believe that God is able? If we do, we need to be asking Him, Lord, teach me your ways and teach me your will, that I may be faithful, and that I may know you. Show me how to climb up so that I experience freedom and victory in my life.